The wind in the Sierra Nevada didn't just blow, it roared like a silver lion through the ancient snow-dusted pines, carrying the scent of cold cedar and the metallic promise of a mountain blizzard. To most, it was a signal to bar the heavy oak doors and retreat to the warmth of a hearth. But to Cassian, or Cass, Thorne, it was the sound of a closing trap. She stood on the balcony of the Blue Crest Inn, her hands stained with the ink of the ledger books she kept for her father. Cass was a woman built of mountain flint and hidden fire, a daughter of the frontier who had spent her youth reading forbidden poetry while learning to lead a pack mule through the treacherous Devil's Slide. She was the steady hand of this high-altitude mining camp, a woman who could calculate the yield of a silver vein while staring down a crooked claim jumper without blinking. Yet, as she watched the sun dip below the jagged peaks, painting the snow in shades of violet and bruised gold, she felt a hollow ache, a longing for a story that hadn't been written in the dust of a mining town. The oppressive silence of the twilight was shattered by the rhythmic, heavy thud of a horse pushed to the brink of collapse. Cass's posture shifted, her spine snapping straight as she reached for the short-barreled shotgun tucked behind the inn's heavy reception desk, a habit born of survival in a place where the law was as thin as the mountain air. Out of the swirling white flurries of the trail emerged a shadow, a tall, broad-shouldered man slumped low in a saddle of darkened, ice-rimed leather. His horse, a massive iron-gray stallion flecked with frozen foam and dark streaks of frozen blood, stumbled as it reached the hitching post. The man didn't dismount, he fell, his spurs jingling with a final lonely metallic clatter against the frost-covered planks of the porch. Cass didn't hesitate. She dropped the gun and ran, her boots thudding against the wood. As she reached him, the man rolled onto his back, his breath coming in ragged, shallow plumes of steam that dissipated into the freezing night. Even through a mask of trail grime and frostbite, his face was striking, etched with a grim, quiet nobility and eyes the color of a winter sky just before a storm. "Steady," whispered Cass, her voice a calm anchor against the rising gale. "You're at the Blue Crest. You're inside the wire." The man's hand, calloused and scarred, shot out to grip her wrist with a strength that made her breath hitch. Don't let the riders see the brands," he wheezed, his voice like grinding ice. "The gold is gone, but the truth remains." Cass looked down at him, seeing the dark, frozen bloom of a gunshot wound just beneath his collarbone. This was Silas Cade Sterling. She didn't need a wanted poster to recognize the man they called the Ghost of the Sierras, a legendary gunslinger accused of a stagecoach massacre that had claimed the lives of a territorial governor's guards. But as she looked into those desperate, searching eyes, she didn't see a mass murderer. She saw a man who had been running so long he had forgotten what it was like to be warm. For the next 10 days, the world narrowed to the flickering radius of a stone fireplace in the inn's cellar room. Cass tended to Silas with a clinical precision that masked a rising, unbidden tide of emotion. She washed the grit and blood from his skin, discovering a map of scars that told a story of a life lived on the jagged edge of the law. When the fever took him, he didn't scream for mercy. He whispered the name of a ranch in the valley and a brother who had been hanged for a crime he didn't commit. Cass stayed through the deepest hours of the night, pressing cool cloths to his brow and reading him passages from her mother's old books, her heart hammering against her ribs whenever his hand would find hers in the dark, seeking a tether to the world of the living. The town of Blue Crest was a fragile thing, a collection of timber buildings clinging to the mountainside like barnacles. Tensions simmered beneath the surface like a dormant volcano. The local sheriff, a man with eyes like dull nickels, had been asking questions about the stranger in the cellar. When Silas finally woke, the air in the room felt electric, heavy with the weight of things unsaid. He watched her move about the room, his gaze following the way the firelight caught the stray copper strands of her hair. "Why help me?" he asked one afternoon, his voice stronger now, though still etched with a deep-seated weariness. "You know the price on my head. You could buy 10 inns with the reward." Cass paused, a tray of broth in her hands. She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the honor hidden behind the outlaw's mask. "I see a man who had every chance to shoot his way out of here, but chose to bleed in silence instead. Out here, Silas, the law is often just a tool for the powerful. I'd rather trust my own eyes than a poster printed in a city 500 miles away." Silas let out a short, bitter laugh. "I'm a dead man walking, Cass. The men who actually robbed that stagecoach, the ones wearing the governor's livery, they won't stop until I'm buried. I'm the only witness left." "Then we'll make sure you're a witness who stands tall," she said, her voice firm. The days that followed were a delicate dance of growing intimacy and shared fear. Silas began to help with the heavy lifting around the inn as his strength returned, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he mended broken shutters or taught Cass how to clean a fouled revolver. The local miners began to respect the quiet stranger who worked without complaint. Cass watched him, a lump forming in her throat. She saw the man he could have been, a rancher, a father, a man of peace. One evening, as the moon hung like a silver coin over the snow-capped peaks, they sat together on the back porch. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of a wolf. Silas reached out, his fingers brushing against hers. The contact was like a spark to dry tinder. "I can't stay," he whispered, his face clouded with pain. "Every hour I'm here, I'm drawing the fire closer to you." Turned to him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And every hour you're gone, I'll be listening for a gunshot that I can't answer. Don't go because of me, Silas. Go because you have to finish it. But don't you dare think I'm afraid." "Cass." He moved closer, the scent of pine needles and gun oil clinging to him. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of her jaw. "I've spent my life looking for a reason to stop. I found it in a cellar with a girl who reads poetry to outlaws." He kissed her then, a slow, desperate collision of two souls who had found their home in the most dangerous place on earth. It tasted of salt and longing, a promise whispered into the vast, indifferent mountain night. In that moment, the danger felt miles away, buried under the weight of their shared heartbeat. But the Sierras never allow a debt to go unpaid. The following morning, the sound of galloping hooves echoed through the pass, not the law, but a group of bounty hunters who were actually mercenaries in the pocket of the corrupt territorial officials. They rode into Blue Crest with torches and repeating rifles, led by a man with a cold, scarred face. Cass's heart sank as she saw them surround the inn. "Sterling, come out and we leave the girl and the town alone." Silas was already at the window, his revolvers holstered low, his face a mask of grim determination. He looked at Cass, a world of regret and love in his eyes. "I have to end this. The ledger with the governor's signatures in my saddlebag. If I fall, Cass, you get it to the federal marshal in Sacramento." "We're ending this together," she said, grabbing her shotgun. "You don't get to be the hero alone today." The confrontation was a chaotic blur of gunsmoke and ice. Cass stood on the balcony, her shotgun barking as she kept the mercenaries from rushing the front doors. Silas moved like a mountain shadow, flanking them from the stables, his twin colts singing a deadly song. The air exploded with the sharp crack of Winchesters. It was brutal and quick. When the smoke cleared, the mercenaries lay in the crimson snow, and Silas stood over their leader, his own shoulder bleeding, but his hand steady as he held the ledger. The townspeople emerged, their murmurs growing into a roar as they realized the ghost had actually saved them from a band of killers. Silas didn't look at the crowd, he looked only at Cass. He walked to her, his breath coming in heavy plumes, and handed her the ledger. "You saved me," he said, his voice a mere whisper. "The trail leads both ways, Silas. You gave me something to believe in again." He looked out toward the horizon, where the storm was finally breaking, revealing a clear, brilliant sky. "I have to go to Sacramento to testify. I have to make sure this is truly over so I can come back." "I know," she said, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. "But I'll be here. I'll be the one keeping the fire high so you can find your way back through the snow." He pulled her close, the warmth of her body a promise against the cold trail ahead. He didn't say goodbye. Instead, he whispered a vow into her hair, a promise of a future where they wouldn't have to hide, where the only thing they'd be running toward was each other. As he mounted his stallion and turned toward the mountain pass, the sound of his departure was no longer a frantic escape, but a steady, purposeful rhythm. Cass watched until he was nothing more than a speck against the vastness of the white peaks, the wind carrying the scent of cedar and the hope of a new dawn. The frontier was still wild, and the road ahead was long, but for the first time in her life, Cassian Thorne knew exactly where she was going.